Hello,
Hi.
Dave. David, how are you?
I'm great. Is that you, Roy?
It is.
I'm hearing you just by your voice because I'm seeing the screen of presenters. Great to see you, Roy, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to wait maybe one more minute and then just jump right into it. Roy, how are you doing?
Good, good. Busy, hard at work, and all that normal stuff.
Nice. Very cool. Okay, if it's okay with everyone, then I think we're going to jump in and get started. I know some people may continue to join, but I'm going to kick us off. So we can go to the next slide, which is a simple slide, but welcome to the first U.S. Architects Declare meeting of the year and the first meeting in a little bit of time. It's great to see everyone here. Thanks for joining. I know it's a busy time of year. My name is David Benjamin. I'm co-chair of the steering committee, and you'll hear from many other members of the steering committee during this meeting. Who will briefly introduce themselves. So in this town hall meeting, we only have an hour, but we wanted to quickly offer a few thoughts and updates, and then have a lot of time to invite all of you to join us in thinking about what activities, projects, and actions we might think about pursuing in the next year. We can go to the next slide, please. So as you all know, we're an organization that consists of hundreds of signatories who are joining together to work collectively on the climate, justice, and biodiversity emergencies. And I think it's worth quickly noting here that there are, sorry, go back a little bit. Yeah, so I think it's worth quickly noting that there are many organizations that are working on similar topics, other organizations in our field, and we really aim to collaborate with them when it's relevant and to complement their work when it makes sense. In other words, not to duplicate efforts. But we can also note that maybe Architects Declare has a couple of unique characteristics. This is a list that's a kind of work in progress, but we certainly aim to have an intersectional approach, not just carbon, not just biodiversity, not just justice, but all three of those together. That's what we mean by intersectional. We also aim to be action-oriented, and we are a community based on the practice of architecture, even though we engage other things, education, policy, but we're really founded in the practice of architecture. And maybe even more than that, we're oriented towards small and medium-sized firms. So these characteristics are up for discussion. It's a working list, but the important point is to be conscious of the role we're playing and what other groups are in this area, and avoid duplication and work together for a multiplier effect. Okay, next slide, please. As you know, we're founded around a declaration and a kind of collective commitment that we've all reviewed and signed on to. And one of the things that we've been discussing in the steering committee over the past couple of months is that we may be able to enable more action, if we go to the next slide, by focusing, by focusing on a theme for the year. Not to the exclusion of other issues, but just to see if we can create some activation energy for our activities, projects, and actions, and to have some kind of focus. So the next slide, the theme that we're proposing for this year is adaptive futures. And Pancho, I'll pass it over to you to describe a little more about that.
Thank you so much, David. So my name is Francisco Brown, but I go by Pancho. I work at Sage & Coombe Architects here in New York, and I would like to introduce you the subject that we kind of like, the general theme that we thought would be interesting to look into for this year. We call it adaptive futures, based on the idea and on the sincere belief that retaining existing buildings and reusing materials are powerful levers in the race to decarbonize. Rather than perpetuating an extravagant cycle of demolition and new construction, which only benefits, as we know, a few select ones, and understanding that retrofittings of buildings and cities conserve resources and sustain communities in place. By seeking opportunities for change through buildings in place, adaptive reuse presents more holistic approaches for climate activism that are rooted in attention, care, and resourcefulness while maintaining culturally rich existing building fabrics. And we thought one of the points of departures was kind of like understanding what is the current nascent research. And we always look into one of our favorite partners in this interesting race, which is Architecture 2030, with few graphics looking into how retrofitting a building has way less impact in terms of like embodied carbon through to the environment, and how just pretty much those three categories between doing nothing, retrofitting a building, and building a brand new building marks a sincere has a kind of like double up the amount of carbon over the years put in the world. And a few other references that we thought would be very interesting to share based on the work that Architecture 2030, they developed this new tool to calculate carbon and other metrics on existing buildings, not only on new buildings, based on the research done by other organizations such as the Climate Heritage Network and other organizations like the Heritage and Climate Planning. And I wanted to share with you before we move on, a couple of interesting examples that are happening here in our city and other places, including the New York City Office for Adaptive Reuse that is looking into existing office spaces that have been underused due to the COVID pandemic, that is like looking into what other kind of typologies, including housing, can look. And an interesting example is the project that Atelier 10 and other architects are looking into for the NYU 370 J Street, that is reconverting an old office building, an unused office building that was used by NYU and other tenants into research center and educational sector area. Or the Wilmcott House as well, another energy efficient retrofit affordable housings by ACD Architects on the other side of the pond. And right here as well in the US, very close, we have new projects kind of like rethinking about the enormous portfolio and stock that we have of existing buildings, some of them with more historic relevance than others, but kind of like pinpointing at the opportunities in the near future, including the Breuer Hotel by Becker and Becker, this cultural project in Houston, Texas by OMA, transforming an old post office into a commercial spaces, and kind of like the highline to kind of like clap on this series of examples of how an abandoned piece of infrastructure went to become the third most visited park in New York City. And I will pass it along to talk a little bit further about the subgroups and carbon, biodiversity, and justice update. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Pancho. My name is Debbie Chen. I'm a practicing architect, also an assistant professor at the Rhode Island School of Design. So I wanted to, before I get into the specific work of each working group, I wanted to take a minute to highlight some of the exciting things that the three working groups have been up to in the past year. And our, like Pancho mentioned, our members are organized, have organized projects and initiatives under the working groups of carbon, biodiversity, and justice. And although each working group has focused on their respective issues, we saw some through lines in our work, which speaks to the interwoven nature of our missions. Next. I also wanted to use this opportunity to invite everyone here to join a working group if you haven't done so already, especially if you see work that really speaks to you. It's our aim this year, like David said, to increase the overlap within these three working groups and to build intersectional projects under the broader theme of adaptive futures. Next. Next for the video, thank you. So one of the projects that I wanted to showcase is really a rich collection of resources that all three working groups have been gathering across the board. This is a snapshot of the carbon database that was put together by the carbon working group. And you can see that we're gathering information related to carbon policy, low carbon materials, regenerative materials, and various life cycle analysis tools as well. Next. In a similar manner, this is a treasure trove put together by the can you go back one, please, Blanchard? Thank you. So this is a snapshot of the database collected by the Biodiversity Working Group. And you can see from the categories here, really the breadth of information that was being considered. And already from some of the categories being selected, really the intersectional gaze of these categories. Next. Similarly, in the Justice Working Group, there's been a commendable amount of work put together relating to gathering resources, literature, and expertise surrounding the overlap of justice and climate policy. Next. So we're taking the first steps in translating some of this research into actionable projects. And this is one example. This is the decarbonization resources guide put together by the Carbon Working Group. Next. And this is a series online available on their website that really helps to serve architects to take action in decarbonizing their projects by asking a few specific questions ranging from improving client engagement, reducing carbon footprints, and also striking a link between carbon and environmental justice. We hope you have a chance to check that out. Next. So now I wanted to briefly focus on the specific areas of the Carbon Working Group. Next, please. So the mission of the working group is to empower architects to radically decarbonize their projects and to advocate for immediate and sustained decarbonization across the entire building construction sector. With adaptive reuse or adaptive future in mind, it's important to declare that a lot of important work can be done through the decarbonization of existing buildings. Next. This is a chart that or pie graph that most of us are already familiar with, points out that almost 50% of carbon emissions comes from the building sector. 22.7% of that really comes from embodied carbon related to new construction, whereas 28% is related to building operations. Next. It's also important to point out that between now and 2050, embodied carbon will account for nearly half of all new construction emissions. And so so it's important to note that as architects try to meet the demands of new housing and new buildings, we should also acknowledge that new construction bears additional social and environmental pressures. Next, please. And that's because a building project causes environmental and social impacts far beyond its project site. This is largely due to the process of material extraction and misplaced carbon emissions through operations, leading to further unwilding of the natural environment. Next, please. So with that in mind, we really wanted to reframe some of our original levers of change within the framework of adaptive futures. One call to action is to retool design practices in consideration of existing buildings. So looking at life cycle analysis tools and asking how they can better address existing building stock. Next, please. Another lever of change that we're interested in continuing is to continue the work and advocacy for low carbon policy, benchmarking, and the development of electrification codes within our cities. Another lever of change is to increase building electrification. And we should note that this applies not only to new construction, but also to our existing buildings. Next. And lastly, we're interested in pushing new materials. In the realm of embodied carbon, we want to advocate for not only new low carbon materials, but we also want to foreground efforts to create circular material economies. In thinking about adaptive futures, the question we're exploring is how can efforts in decarbonization from policy to materiality really prioritize our existing buildings and the people that they serve? with that, I'll throw it over to Joyce. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Can you go back one, Pancho? Yeah, so my name is Joyce Huang. I am an associate professor at University of Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning, and I direct a practice called Answer the Prairie, also based in Buffalo. It's really nice to see everyone here and a lot of familiar names. Next. So our mission in the biodiversity working group is essentially to advance our field's understanding of how critically important it is, not just to address, but to normalize a culture that takes actions toward enhancing biodiversity in the built environment. And so we want to make it clear that biodiversity is relevant and important in the building sector. Next. It's clear that we as humans have not lived alone and we cannot survive alone. At the scale of the planet, there are approximately 8 million species. And at the scale of the building, research has shown that each home has an average of 100 species living in it. Next. We know that we need to be good stewards of the earth, but that is not something that's been the case. So we know that we're experiencing biodiversity loss and species extinctions at an alarming rate, which is unprecedented. Next. And as we develop the world, humans have been the drivers in significantly impacting our environments. Next. A question that we face as architects is how do we intervene in the built environment and work in a world that is rapidly urbanizing when we know that urbanization is actually one of the most significant causes of biodiversity loss. Next. And as we're all aware, the very fact of new building and infrastructure construction is disruptive to existing ecosystems that have flourished over time. So water systems, flora and fauna, habitats, microclimates are shaped as much by existing structures as they are by the areas around them. Next. So in fact, buildings and built infrastructures are a critical part of our landscapes and ecosystems. And this, for example, is Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas, which houses approximately 1.5 million bats, and it's the largest urban bat colony in North America. And so prioritizing adaptive reuse strategies is a step in recognizing the ecological communities that are already thriving in place and further ensuring that we don't uproot the living systems that have already adapted to our built environments and have been performing ecosystem services over time. Next. And developing strategies for working through circular economies is important. For example, the smart use of resources, recovering material through recycling and upcycling, and regenerating resources in the construction process. These are all strategies that mitigate pressure on the environment in terms of resource extraction and related habitat loss. Next. And so in thinking about and organizing around adaptive futures, a question we're exploring is what are the case studies and examples and situations that we can explore and elevate together that are not only foreground questions of critical preservation, but also foreground the ecological conservation of buildings and structures. And next, I'll hand it off to Arathi.
Hi, everyone. Arthi Gowda with CGF Architects, and welcome today. Very glad you're here. So just to foreground a little bit of the work of the Justice Group, if we go to the next slide. Again, thinking how we can take the work that we did historically and bring it forward. The Justice Group historically was looking at elimination of barriers in the profession, a few things in terms of healthy communities, equitable social and civic infrastructure, and most importantly, how can we empower communities? And the group itself very much was thinking about how community engagement was less a part of the process in many architectural firms, and even in the way we teach, compared to where we think it needs to be to have justice in the built environment. Go to the next slide. And so, of course, we know that the climate crisis, the emergency, also is compounding impacts of environmental justice that we already see. We go to the next slide. Exacerbating inequality that has been designed into our built environment in terms of open space and access. Next. And of course, as architects, we have a responsibility with our health, safety, and welfare continuing education units, not just continuing education, but it's part of the public infrastructure that we're building. So we've historically contributed to inequality with inaction, how could we have more of an active role in the future? We also know, of course, that there are toxins and health impacts that are contributing to injustice in the built environment. So increasing our awareness around these topics, very important, especially when we're designing in communities that are impacted by toxic environments. Next. And then also understanding the histories that are still perpetuating in our built environments. This was just last year in Chicago, a historic BIPOC community that was fighting for community engagement to make sure that industrialization didn't come back into their neighborhood. Essentially, they just kicked it out and it's the weakest link, so they're trying to come back into the neighborhood. Go to the next slide. But we see that exploitation too if we look at the map of where pipelines and extraction is in the country. That is often overlapped with indigenous communities. Next. And of course, the ever urgent topic of climate change and safety and the reality and the difficulty of climate migration. Something that perhaps we don't want to face, but we will have to face in the near future. Next. And so, of course, those are a lot of things that we're all aware of on the call and aware of our past sins, so to speak. But how can we learn from those past sins and repair our urban fabric in the future? Some work from segregation by design that really impacts the overall structures of the cities we live and work in, design in. Next. And so Debbie showed a little bit behind the curtain of our historic work. One of that outcomes of that was also a deep community engagement series. And as I had mentioned, recognizing that perhaps we all don't have the skills that we would like to have in community engagement that are required to do the deep repair work needed for restorative justice in the built environment. Next. And so if we look to the future, and as we think about adaptive futures in our next year of work together, just like carbon and biodiversity, we want to think about that work we've all done together and how that can move forward into the next phase of work. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Rashida, and we're going to open the floor to have a discussion.
Thanks, Arthi. I would like to invite, well, first I should introduce myself, and next I'm going to invite you to introduce yourselves as well. My name is Rashida Ng. I'm an associate professor and chair of undergraduate architecture at the University of Pennsylvania. And as Arthi said, really the purpose of this meeting is to hear from you. So if you can go to the next, Pancho. We would love for you to I'm going to say turn on your cameras if you're in a position to do so, and introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your email, and your institution. But the purpose of this meeting really is to build our programming for the new year around the theme of adaptive futures. So we're going to share a few questions, and we'd love for you to respond either by continuing to put your responses in the chat, or to raise your hand and unmute. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, waiting for your names and emails and institutions to go in there just as an introduction. And then in a moment, we'll go to the next slide. Just give it 30 seconds. I think people are probably typing. And it is great to see some, for me, some new names and also some names, familiar names of people that I've worked with before. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Here we go. Now our chat is waking up. So Pancho, if you want to go to the next slide. So we on the steering committee are pretty excited about our new theme of adaptive futures. And as David said at the beginning, we're really interested in continuing the work that has been done by Architects Declare in the past, but also building on that in a way that's intersectional, in a way that's action oriented. So to get us started, we would love to hear from you, your feedback on this theme. What gets you excited about it? Are there things that we can do that will serve our signatories and our members and really build our collective awareness of possibilities in the future? So, Aaron, I noticed that you turned your camera on. I don't know if it was to speak or not, but
to say hello. I know I've been on a few of these larger calls where you try to create community over Zoom, and it's not easy with the cameras off. Anyway, hello, you all. It's great to see you all and hear the work you've been doing, and look forward to following up on all the good resources that you've been putting together and contributing.
Thanks for coming. So I guess this first question. Oh, go ahead, Arthi.
I'm just going to put a ringer out there since everyone's being a little quiet. And I think what makes me excited is, in a way, it's a return to some ideals in terms of historic preservation. You know, I grew up as an architect in Chicago, and there were a lot of pitched battles about preservation in Chicago, the Chicago School of Design versus the development community, in a sense, and it makes Chicago a great architectural city today. That was before we understood the impacts of resource extraction, but we well understood the impacts on community, and we simply couldn't build that way. So I'm really excited about this framing because it takes all of that design knowledge and adds on the climate knowledge. And I do think, in the way that David mentioned in the beginning, this cohort, this particular group of people also has many academics, many teachers that are thinking about community and intersectionality in a richer way than we have time for in practice. So that's what gets me excited, is that the types of people that Architects Declare brings together, and that we are building on a legacy of preservation.
May I share that I think it's a great focus, and I think that we haven't always, I know at least at Grimshaw Architects, we mostly do new construction. A lot of it has to do with the focus on the types of infrastructure that we mostly do. But I will share that I think that we are trying to become a lot more intelligent about helping clients, especially as we are more and more getting involved with early stages of project conceptualization. But we haven't, the motivations for for helping a client realize that they don't need a new building are not always there, as you can imagine, especially when the economy is not as strong, or when you're predicting a downturn. You're not going to necessarily steer a client away from a new construction. So I think working on those motivations within our practice, i.e. thinking about, what does leadership look like? How do you, as a practice, let's say you've made a commitment, you've joined Architects Declare, like we have, how does that commitment represent itself in terms of having recommended to a client to not pursue a new construction? What are the motivations there? I think that's one thing. And, more and more cities are trying to create those motivations within, giving more or whatever, there's all kinds of ways that city can help clients see a value in adaptive reuse, be it through lower property taxes or other kinds of development incentives that can be part. But those seem to me like, if you're looking what is the theory of change behind improving the amount of adaptive reuse, that theory of change looks at all types of policies that cities and municipalities, states, et cetera, can bring into planning, and then how architects can make those municipalities aware. I mean, I see Will Wright, who's the part of the AIA Los Angeles, where I am situated in Los Angeles, and we meet with city council people and others, and we are in a housing emergency. Our new mayor just declared it. And how do you transform some of these commercial uses, which are not, you're not seeing the same value from them, how do you get those and how do those become housing, and how do you help clients see those opportunities, et cetera? So de-risking the conversion of like commercial and office to being housing use would be a really great thing to look at. Like where is that happening, and what are they seeing? What are cities seeing? How are they seeing movement within development community? That was a lot to say. Sorry.
No,
I am in LA. I've had a
great.
lot of coffee.
I think it's great, Aaron. And I think you raised a couple of points and about really the challenges, right, as an architect in terms of educating your clients, advocacy work. And also, I heard at the end a suggestion for a series or an event that might bring people from various parts of the U.S. together, various cities and locations, to start to talk about what's happening in housing or what's happening in your area, and to learn from each other. And we are taking notes from this session, and I think it's a really great suggestion. I see, Michelle, you have your hand raised.
Yes. What excites me, basically, like someone said about the history of the buildings, because there are so many buildings that has such a already existing presence that just needs to be modified. But I think the real thing to dig a little bit deeper in is that policies and building codes need to change, so that this adaptive reuse can be something that future generations can use as well. So it's important not only from the architect standpoint, and then also to deal with the community, but then also on a higher level of getting with politicians to really listen to those communities of like, look, this is what we need. This is what needs to occur for all of us to really live better and well.
Well said, Michelle. I will not try to paraphrase that, but +1, and I see a lot of head nodding there as well. So we can continue to discuss this, but we do have a few other questions. So Pancho, if you want to keep us moving. So the other part of this, and I kind of already talked about this, is we're really we've had a lot of discussion within the steering committee about what this could be, ranging from different kind of virtual lunchtime discussions around projects, particularly ones that could be highlighted that start to address some of the questions that have been raised thus far. But we want to hear from you and even partner with you to build the programming for this year. So what activities, what projects, what actions do we need to pursue under this theme for 2023 of adaptive futures? And I'll just let you know, I'm an educator and I'm really comfortable with silence.
It may help too to just mention some of the things we've done in the past. So we've had working groups, we have had lectures, we have had reading groups, and we've also had the community engagement series, which in a sense was more interactive. So the working groups started hitting on some of the things Aaron had mentioned, like gathering all the resources, seeing what the policy initiatives were, things like that. One thing that we realized and we wanted to pivot or adapt in this next year of work is that we were making digital gold mines, and you kind of saw that. And we were trying to think in our activities in the coming year, how could we make things more amplified or a little bit easier for people to maybe listen in on a call and see? Because essentially the team members who are on the working groups did benefit a lot and started understanding the landscape of policy and tools and people who are connecting and doing deep work in these areas of interest. But it wasn't necessarily getting communicated out. So that's something we want to work on.
Randy, I saw you may have unmuted to share a thought.
Yeah, I think for one, this presentation was really great, and I'm really excited to see all the topics that have emerged. I think myself, I've been like really immersed in material performance lately, and seeing a lot of like kind of biogenic materials show up was really amazing. But I have also been working this kind of adaptive reuse in Buffalo at the moment. So I think something that would be beneficial to me, I think from my perspective, is that you guys have touched upon this focus to like mid-level and small firms. So I think a lot of what's problematic in terms of like tackling the climate crisis in this lens, especially as a small firm. So I work with a couple colleagues of mine, and we're only 3 people essentially, but we take on these bigger projects in Buffalo. And we tend to have a hard time finding the resources to be able to push towards these projects. And for instance, one of the projects that I'm working on independently right now is trying to get grant money for a bank. We're trying to repurpose it into a cultural institution, but the economics like aren't really feasible for the owner. So we have to do a lot of kind of back end work to be able to produce graphics and visuals and grant packages, which are normally outside of the scope of our work. But I've kind of been assisting the owner because I'm pretty close with him. So it's been difficult in that sense, trying to navigate, I think, the process to be able to try to bring these projects to life as we all kind of want to. And then we get hit with these really massive roadblocks, which become really discouraging because we've been working on this project for about like 2.5 years now. And luckily we're finding pools of money and we're kind of pushing it forward incrementally, but it's going very slow. So I think something that would be helpful is like maybe a series of workshops, as you were mentioning, about how to share experiences like in those situations and how we might be able to translate that in our own practice. And then another thing is kind of understanding workshop maybe oriented also towards tutorials. There was a lot of data that was kind of showing up in the slides that was really exciting as well, which was like how to do the carbon emission calculations and how to apply that to building analysis and running simulations and kind of creating the story so that we might be able to make that pitch to a client, because it seems like the narrative is changing in which we're not only talking about how design is affecting the kind of spatial condition in which occupants inhabit architecture, but rather also how we might convince a client that that design is also tackling this larger agenda or this global agenda that we have, so that we can all be conscious in terms of the different kind of audiences that we're working with. So that's like another bigger question I have too, is just how to like convince clientele that this kind of data that we're showing them is meaningful to like their decision making and how it might end up helping their own business structure kind of moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. I think that really connects to something that Aaron said before about the kind of relationship and the responsibility really to educate our clients. I'm going to go to David and then to Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, kind of building off that, I was thinking something kind of similar, Randy and Aaron. To back up one quick second, I'm often thinking about what can be the most effective levers for change and how can Architects Declare, use those levers, identify them, and have the most impact. And one of the things I keep coming back to is the collective action that we can do. We're almost 400 firms, as you saw. And so what can we do collectively that would be hard to do individually? And then I come to the pledge. And so this is kind of a loosely formed thought, but I wonder if we could sharpen some aspect of our pledge with adaptive futures in mind to do something like, for example, all commit to, for every project, have a discussion with the client about reusing existing buildings and considering adaptive reuse. Now, I mean, obviously, in some cases, it's more, relevant than others. And in many cases, the site's already been selected, that we're a little late for the brief. But if somehow collectively we could all promise to do that, even if it seems, a little bit of a stretch, we could maybe have this multiplier effect. We're 400 firms times a few projects a year per firm, et cetera. And Rashid, I think it gets to what you were saying, education. We're not only just services, but we can be more than just services. We can do more than just give the client what they think they want. We can do more.
Yeah, thanks, David. Aaron, and then Pancho.
So I was just going to add that, I suspect that we're all in conversation with a lot of the same people outside of Architects Declare, i.e., I'm also a part of the Carbon Leadership Forum. I also regularly am in contact with the team at Architecture 2030. I'm a member of AIA COAT. I, for the first time, decided to attend Greenbuild after many years and learned that there's a lot of very good people there, and I shouldn't be dismissive of LEED. I just wanted to say that I kind of know now the direction, path of travel for the LEED version 5. They want to become more regenerative focused. A lot of people there were talking about embodied racism and trying to address issues of justice in a new way. I think that an aspect of what we might consider doing this year is, like I said, I think we're all involved with a lot of these groups, is to look at what they are focusing on this year. What are they trying to get out and share, and be a little bit more coordinated potentially. And I think that we are trying to coordinate, but we haven't been as we haven't been as clear about how we are coordinating. And I think there may be an opportunity there that we haven't been able to address as a bigger community of built environment folks. And I just wanted to share that I think there may be something really as far as leverage goes. There's a theory of change which says we as a group, as a community, will produce resources which create capacity within the system of terms of education, what we're talking about, shared resources, et cetera, which is really powerful and is great. There's other to say that maybe we can impact elements of pilot credits within LEED that are more specific to the what we've learned, and that would be a lever. And then we know that when LEED projects are successful, that changes city council members and others within government around policy. And how do we kind of expedite that and improve, accelerate the change in that feedback loop between kind of projects that are successful and policy? I think that's pretty important over the next couple of years, and love to be a part of that thinking.
Aaron, that's really great. And it's like you're reading the slides, but we're going the next slide to talk about what are these other organizations that are doing work in this area. How do we coordinate and how do we work with them? So we're going to come back to that. Let me go to Pancho and then Randy, you know, or you're good. Okay, Pancho, then Arthi, and then we'll change slides as well.
Hi, no, I think I just want to mention a few things that are very interesting in terms of the next steps. I think we're going to incorporate some of your suggestions, but for sure, kind of looking into this onto the side of the client about all of these initiatives that are starting within cities, like this massive task force that was implemented that is being implemented in New York City called the Adaptive Reuse, by just looking at this, huge 2.2 million square feet of empty office stock that we have in our city. So I think what is really interesting is now politicians are aware of it too, and that there is a massive trend because of the enormous shifts that the pandemic caused, that power is looking into the existing. I think so. It's not a bad context to operate in terms of creating the arguments and the evidence out there to convince clients and to sell a project. I'm going to put together all of these also resources about what is this policy frameworks that different cities are putting together too.
Yeah, that's really great. And if people aren't paying attention to the chat, I also want to highlight the links that Will Wright put in, the Calgary program that he's sharing with the LA City Council, and also Architects Journal Retro First program. These are really great resources. Thank you for sharing them. Randy.
Yeah, I just had a quick thought about something kind of, I guess, related to the next steps or activities. Something I've noticed in a lot of these meetings or just questions I've had in my head is how to move this beyond this kind of internal, I guess, cohort of people that we have, in which we're trying to affect the general public and communities that might not understand these topics too well. And I'm just thinking about kind of communities that I've been working with on the east side of Buffalo that just aren't even thinking at that level because we're so kind of worried about the finances. But obviously these things are very relevant. So in terms of activities, I wonder if there are ways in which we might be able to have workshop or exchanges in which clients are actually present with us in these conversations, and might be able to give us feedback about what their reluctance is to kind of jumping on board, whether it's a lack of knowledge or there are other things that they're thinking about from their perspective that we might be able to react to just to get more information. So I'm just curious about how to open some of these activities potentially this year, into the community at a kind of broader range and have them actually kind of respond to these questions as well, because I'd be curious to kind of see how they're thinking about these things and how we might be able to ease some of those, I guess, tensions, like with our skill sets, I suppose.
Yeah, I love that. I think, we all interface with the public as architects, and our ability to really speak to a public audience as well, Randy, is essential to do this work, because we won't do it alone, and there's a lot of advocacy and even education that's required along with that. Michelle.
Yes, Randy brought up a good point in regards to trying to reach the community. What we kind of done here is that basically if you work with grassroots communities, those are they're the soldiers in the communities, first and foremost. If you reach out to those organizations first, then they'll put you on to everybody else within the community to come and move forward with whatever project you have. A good example here in Brooklyn that we noticed was with the Gowanus situation with the canal. That we reached out to the grassroots organizations that were protesting, the ones who said what was good, what was bad. But the thing was, is that once we reached out to those people, they were able to give us even more information of like, well, you need to address it this way or that way. So I think if in any of this situation, you have to first work with the people who are already there, find out where the organizations are, and then they'll be more than happy to hear your set or give their sense of what needs to be done or what could be done.
Yeah, that's great. And Arthi put in the chat the AIA Leadership Grassroots Summit in February as well. So I think there's one more. Arthi, did you want to, I see you added something to the chat. Do you want to just talk about that for a second before we move on?
Yeah, we'll try to keep it brief too, because I want to give your time to others. But that is a summit too that is looking city by city. So it has the big chapter represented, and then also some of the national committees, which is why I'm going to for the National Code and the Government Advocacy Committee, which will also be there. So it's definitely, I think, something on the radar. And the question will be, what is the best way for us not to approach those organizations just within the committees we are, but more in partnership or more strategic? And I think, again, that was something else that was coming out of our working groups was a lot of those motherboards were compilations, in a sense, of tremendous work that is already happening. And how can our work be more than compilation? I mean, it already was, but you recognize when you are working in these groups that everyone is trying to compile a motherboard, actually. And so I think a conversation could actually be around how is there a combined resources like organization, and then discrete tasks that all of these wonderful organizations are doing that are specific.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, I guess the second half of this question about understanding, and this is something we've been discussing within the steering committee, understanding how architects declare is unique and what role that we can play within, this field of organizations through which there is a lot of overlap, right, in interest, which isn't to say that overlap is bad, but really understanding what are we uniquely positioned to do. So let's hold that, and also I want to be mindful of the time. Let's go to the last question, please, Pancho. This is action oriented. So how should we meet and work on these projects? What kind of structure? Debbie did a really great run through of the working group structure that we had before. I think, there's a lot of great resources that were compiled and events that were planned around that. But one of the challenges that we saw was that we're intentionally desiring to be more intersectional, and it started to look at these issues of biodiversity, carbon, and justice in working groups, but somewhat in isolation of each other. So our hope and our expectation is that a theme that actually cuts across all of those three groups will allow us to adapt our structure in a way that is more intersectional and that looks at some of these the connective tissue, I would say, within topics that are sometimes described as more discrete. So thoughts about a structure or a way to move forward in 2023 around this theme. David.
Just kind of reflecting on some things that other people have said in the meeting. And you know, it connects back to some discussions in Architects Declare over the months and years. I think it could be interesting to think, hey, could we organize not just around these working group topics like carbon, justice, biodiversity, but around projects, and the project would engage aspects of carbon, justice, and biodiversity. So this is totally a brainstorming. I'm sure there's like a lot of baggage on this. I think, Aaron, you were already getting at this, but like one project could be, just learning from you, Aaron, influencing LEED 5, right? So that's a project. It's kind of action oriented, and it could well have aspects of carbon, justice, and biodiversity. So anyway, it's a long-winded way of saying, if we could identify the projects, then I think it would immediately become clear, like, how should we meet? Who wants to be part of this? You know, what do we need to do? What are the deadlines? Who do we need to influence? So I'm not necessarily totally saying the LEED thing, but that's an interesting example to me of where immediately, like, we could potentially do something as this group, and also we could meet with all the other related groups as well.
Yeah.
So what I'm really saying is maybe we can start brainstorming that list and prioritizing a list like that, project-based list.
Yeah, so setting the agenda and allowing those projects, those events to actually form the kind of working groups, if you will, rather than the kind of topically formed working groups. I think that's great. Aaron.
I was just going to add that one other group that I've joined, but only
Let's give him a second. We may have lost him.
Coffee stopped working.
Oh, wait.
I'm sorry, did I freeze? Did
You
I
did.
freeze? Okay, sorry. We have a rain when my connection is unstable, but I was just going to say that maybe a coffee hour, occasional coffee hour, that's what the UN, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network do once a month. They have these coffee hours, and that is very cross-cutting and pretty exciting typically as far as the kind of development of conversation around those topics. So.
Yeah, that's great. We were afraid your coffee stopped working.
Well, it did actually. So that was, yep.
Thanks, Aaron. Joyce and then Randy.
Yeah, hi, sorry, I'm messing around with my my icons here, but I was just going to say something kind of similar. I think just kind of thinking about some of the comments that others had made about, you know, resources for small and medium-sized firms and people wanting to kind of communicate with clients and community members and so on. Maybe there's something like kind of like, I don't want to say office hours, but like informal meetings where, you know, people who have similar kind of interests or, you know, project types or something like that can sort of get together and share resources and could tap into the resources that we already have gathered at US Architects Declare as well.
Yeah, that's good. Randy?
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. Maybe on the other end of the spectrum, at a social level, I know something that was kind of effective in other organizations that I've been in is trying to set up meetings in the closest like metropolitan group for different people. So just identifying kind of times and locations in which in an hour radius, I guess, of a city, you might be able to maximize how many people from the group can actually gather in person and talk and have some of these conversations, or even just be able to socialize in person. So there's a balance of kind of the Zoom meetups and conversations, but also this kind of physical and tangible, like, hey, we're all here, like, let's share knowledge and kind of work on this together and kind of gather more people like into the social environment, ease them into some of the topics. Might be an interesting way to kind of have people access a lot of the information as well.
Yeah, and Joyce added, in real life, IRL meetings might be nice too. Pancho, and then I think we're going to need to wrap up because we are just about at the hour.
No, I just wanted to kind of like pick it up where Randy left it. And I think one of the initiatives that I've been thinking as well is just that for me was one of my entry points to Architects Declare, how that is actually a network of architects with a lot of experience. One of my, like, before I even joined, I had the privilege to talk to Roy Decker because a previous person in the steering committee that is working with me at Sage and Coombe connect me with him, and he was super generous to kind of show him a little bit of the framework that they work. And I think what we're gonna try to do as well is to kind of incentivize this type of cross-working, but not only in terms of meeting online, but visiting projects. So we're gonna start also putting together, just going to some of these famous adaptive reuse projects that we all share in our cities. I think it's a sizable list, and just going for an afternoon on a Saturday, we'll try to avoid the heavy lifting as much as we can, but just kind of like, let's all get together outside this meeting, this place, this building, and then the architect's gonna be there an hour, and then, so there's gonna be a lot of that, hopefully, and stay tuned. Thank you.
Thanks, Pancho. David, do you want to just close us out here?
Well, it's so cool to see everyone again. Apologies for the long delay in getting this group back together. But it's been a really great meeting from my perspective, getting the ideas and energy and seeing everyone. And kind of on behalf of the steering committee, we'll be following up soon with a variety of other ways that we can keep the conversation going and keep the momentum going, including, I guess I would want to just invite everyone to keep thinking about some of those questions that you were posing so well, Rashida, because this, we didn't mean to like close off all the input after this meeting and then take action. We want to keep that conversation going. So we'll let you know how to keep contributing in this way. Thank you again. More soon.
Super.
Thank
Thank you
you,
all very
everyone.
much. Good to see you. Good to see you all.